case we have never met, I'm Michael Price, and I want to help you succeed in growing your business.
Welcome, I'm Michael Price, your host.
And I'm Nancy, your co-host.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, and we really need to start by talking about the deed today.
Yeah, it's important.
It is. It's Saturday, February 21st, 2026, and if you are working in the defense industrial base or really any sector that touches federal money.
Right, any federal money at all.
Exactly. Whether you're a CISO, a compliance officer, or even just a mid-level manager, the ground beneath your feet has completely fundamentally shifted.
It's a totally different world now.
It is, because for the last decade, we basically operated under this very specific set of unwritten rules regarding cybersecurity failures.
The old playbook.
The old playbook, right? You get breached, you pay a fine.
Okay.
You issue a very somber press release about how security is your top priority.
Always the top priority.
Always. And then life goes on. It was a corporate problem, and it was solved with a corporate checkbook.
Right. It was an operating expense. I mean, you literally factored the regulatory fine into the cost of the contract.
Just a line item.
Exactly a line item. It was ugly. It was definitely embarrassing for the company, but it wasn't personal. It didn't follow you home.
But looking at the massive stack of sources we have today, that era is dead.
Very dead.
And it didn't just die quietly, right? It was executed. We are seeing this massive transition from corporate liability to executive culpability.
Which is a huge leap.
Huge. We are talking about the difference between a company losing its profit margin and a CISO. Literally losing their freedom.
Going to prison.
Going to prison. We have a lot of ground to cover in this deep dive, but the headline here is that the Department of Justice isn't just looking for refunds anymore, they're looking for handcuffs.
And to really understand why we are here in February 2026, feeling this intense pressure we have to sort of rewind the tape to late 2025. Because the entire industry got immense whiplash in the span of about 30 days. It was just a complete psychological roller coaster.
It really was. Let's look at the timeline because our sources lay this out as the critical turning point, so November 2025.
Right.
The charges against the SolarWinds CISO are dismissed.
I remember that day.
I remember the hot takes on LinkedIn that week. It felt like a massive victory lap for the whole security community.
Oh yeah, everyone was celebrating.
The narrative was basically, see, you cannot put a human being in jail just because they got outsmarted by a nation-state actor.
It totally validated the victim narrative, the idea that if a Russian intelligence service tears through your network, that's effectively an act of war, right?
Right, you're fighting a military.
Exactly. It's not a crime committed by the defender. That was the takeaway. The legal bar to prove that a CISO personally caused the breach was just seen as way too high.
So the industry just exhaled.
A huge sigh of relief.
There's this collective sense of, okay, the government isn't going to criminalize the sheer difficulty of our jobs.
Right, because the job is already impossibly hard.
But then December 10, 2025, the other shoe drops.
Hard.
The champagne corks are literally still on the floor from the SolarWinds dismissal, and the DOJ indicts Danielle Hillmer.
A former senior manager at a major federal contractor.
And the charges, they weren't a slap on the wrist.
No, not at all.
We aren't talking about negligence here. We are talking about wire fraud. Conspiracy.
Serious felony charges.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to dissect that exact gap. Why did the SolarWinds executive walk free while Hillmer is facing federal charges?
It's the million-dollar question, or rather the $250 million question.
Right. So we need to unpack the civil cyber fraud initiative. We need to understand exactly what FedRAMP High actually requires versus what was allegedly delivered in this case.
And we really need to talk about the doctrine of transparent documentation.
We will definitely get to that.
Yeah.
Because that last part is crucial.
If you are listening to this right now and you are someone who signs off on compliance artifacts, the doctrine of transparent documentation is basically the only thing standing between you and a grand jury.
So let's start with the macro view. The DOJ, there was this general assumption floating around that maybe with political shifts and elections, cybersecurity enforcement might take a back seat.
Yeah, bureaucracies usually slow down during transitions.
Exactly, they pump the brakes.
Yeah.
But the numbers from the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative tell a completely different story.
It's the exact opposite of slowing down. I mean, this initiative started back in October 2021.
Right.
And for a while it was pretty quiet. They were building their cases, laying the groundwork. But by the end of 2025, it had turned into an absolute juggernaut.
The numbers are wild.
The sources highlight that in 2025 alone, the DOJ recovered $6.8 billion under the False Claims Act.
$6.8 billion?
Yeah.
That is not just a fine. That is a massive revenue stream. That is a literal budget line item for the federal government.
It is. And it strongly signals that this is a bipartisan effort. Protecting the federal supply chain isn't a left-wing or right-wing issue.
Right. It's just about getting what you paid for.
Exactly. It's a "we paid for security, so give us security" issue. But the shift isn't just about the money anymore.
No, it's about the memo.
Right. The sources point heavily to a specific memo from the DOJ Criminal Division. This came out in May 2025.
And what did it say?
It explicitly stated a new priority on investigating and prosecuting, not just fining federal program and procurement fraud.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. Procurement fraud usually sounds like, I don't know, someone charging the Army $500 for a $10 hammer.
Right, the classic toilet seat example.
Yeah, or a contractor billing for hours that their employees never actually worked. How does that old-school procurement fraud translate to modern cybersecurity?
That is the pivot. That is the genius intellectual leap the DOJ made here. They are now treating cybersecurity controls as a delivered physical good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If I tell the government, hey, I am selling you a highly secure cloud environment, and then I deliver a porous, unpatched server, I haven't just failed at security.
You've committed product substitution.
Exactly. I sold you a Ferrari and I delivered a go-kart with a Ferrari sticker on it. That is the definition of fraud.
And this is where the target on the back completely moves.
It moves down the org chart.
Right, because usually when a massive company commits fraud, we look at the CEO. And we look at the board of directors, but the DOJ is looking way lower down the chart now.
Much lower. They are specifically targeting, quote, information security and senior corporate leaders.
They want the technical people.
They want the person who actually signed the PDF. If you are the CISO or even just a mid-level compliance manager, and you certify that a system meets a government standard when you know for a fact it doesn't, you are the instrument of that fraud.
The corporate veil does not protect you from your own lies.
It doesn't. You can't just hide behind the company logo anymore.
Which brings us directly back to the SolarWinds versus Hillmer comparison. I really want to drill into this because I think a lot of people in the industry are still deeply confused by it.
It's a nuanced difference, but it's everything.
Because SolarWinds was a catastrophe, global impact, massive data loss, countless agencies compromised. Hillmer, by comparison, I mean, looking at the indictment, it almost seems like a paperwork issue.
Right?
So why is the quote-unquote paperwork issue the one that gets criminal charges?
It all comes down to a legal concept called scienter, legal intent.
Intent.
Yes. In the SolarWinds case, the legal argument was essentially that their security was bad and maybe they boasted way too much about it in their marketing materials. But they didn't intend to be breached.
They didn't want the Russians in their network.
Exactly. They were negligent, perhaps, sloppy even, but not criminal. The courts have generally agreed that simply being bad at cybersecurity is not a crime.
Because if being bad at your job was a felony, half the workforce would be in trouble, right?
Yeah, we'd have to build a lot more prisons. It's a failure, but not a crime. But the Hillmer indictment, it paints a completely different picture. This wasn't about getting hacked. It was about what the DOJ calls active concealment. The sources use that exact phrase repeatedly. The core allegation isn't that her security failed. It's that she allegedly orchestrated an active scheme to make the government think it was secure when she knew it absolutely wasn't.
So the crime isn't the vulnerability itself. The crime is the cover-up.
The lie is the crime, specifically knowing misrepresentation. And the stakes here were astronomical. This wasn't some tiny local contract.
No, it was massive.
This involved the U.S. Army and a total contract value of over $250 million. And the system in question was supposedly built to FedRAMP High standards.
Let's pause right there on that term, FedRAMP High.
Okay.
We throw these acronyms around constantly in this industry. FedRAMP, NIST, IL5. But for the listener who maybe isn't deep in the weeds of government compliance, why does the label FedRAMP High trigger such a massive aggressive response from the DOJ?
Because it's the gold standard. FedRAMP is the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. It is the ultimate gatekeeper for cloud services in the government.
And the high part?
The high-impact baseline is specifically for unclassified data that is critical. High impact means this system holds data where, if it were breached or leaked, the loss would have a severe or catastrophic effect on organizational operations, assets, or individuals.
Severe or catastrophic?
Yes. We are talking about sensitive law enforcement data, highly confidential healthcare records, emergency services infrastructure, real life and death stuff.
So this is the serious stuff. This isn't the agency cafeteria menu or the holiday party schedule.
No, it's the critical mission data.
Uh-huh.
And the contractor in this case also claimed to meet DoD impact levels 4 and 5, IL4 and IL5.
Which means
IL5 is for national security systems. You are entering the realm of unclassified but highly sensitive military mission data. The controls required for the NIST SP-853 controls, they are incredibly rigorous.
they aren't just suggestions.
No, they are binary requirements. You either have them implemented or you don't. There is no gray area.
Okay. So Hillmer's company allegedly promised the government this absolute fortress. They sold the Army a literal bank vault.
Right.
What did they actually deliver? What does the indictment say they built?
According to the indictment, a house of cards.
Really of them?
The allegations are actually shocking, especially for a 2026 context. The DOJ claims the system lacked fundamental basic logging,
Wait, no logging?
meaning they couldn't even trace user activity. If someone got in, they wouldn't know what they touched.
That's InfoSec 101.
Exactly. They also allegedly lacked continuous monitoring. But the big one, the one that makes every single security professional reading this indictment wince, is the alleged lack of multi-factor authentication.
No MFA on a FedRAMP High system?
Ugh.
A system handling military data?
Allegedly, yes. No MFA.
I mean, I have MFA on my checking account. I have MFA on my fantasy football league. I literally cannot log into my personal email without tapping my phone.
Everyone does.
How do you even attempt to sell a $250 million system to the United States Army without MFA?
You don't unless you lie about it.
And that's the crux of it?
That is the entire crux of the case. The lack of MFA is a massive security failure, sure, but claiming to the government that you have MFA when you actually don't, that is a false claim.
And doing it for a system that handles national security data.
It borders on gross negligence. It effectively nullifies the entire security architecture. Think about it. If I can just guess or steal a password and walk right through the front door, all your expensive firewalls and encryption just don't matter.
But the indictment goes further than just somebody checking the wrong box on a form, right?
Much further.
Because, oops, I checked the wrong box, or my intern filled out the spreadsheet wrong, is a defense that corporate lawyers absolutely love. But the DOJ is saying this was deeper.
Right. This is where the active concealment part comes in. This is the detail in the sources that honestly reads like a movie script. The indictment alleges that Hillmer didn't just passively ignore the gap. She allegedly instructed her team to actively hide it. There are allegations of Potemkin Village tactics.
Potemkin Village, creating a fake facade?
Exactly. Putting up a painted piece of wood to look like a secure building.
What does that actually look like in practice, though, like in a software demo?
Well, the sources mention explicit instructions to, quote, withhold or hide the true state of the system during live demonstrations to the authorizing officials, the AOs.
So the people grading the test.
Right. Imagine you are running a live demo for the government auditors. You know for a fact that if you click on the main settings tab, they will clearly see that MFA is disabled.
Right.
So you allegedly pull your engineers aside beforehand and tell them, do not click that tab under any circumstances. If the auditor asks to see it, say, we can't show it right now because of a weird graphical glitch.
Or a server timeout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Make up an excuse. Or, and this is even worse, you show them a screenshot or a screen share from a separate pristine test environment that does have MFA enabled, and you pretend they are looking at the live production system.
That is incredibly bold.
Yeah.
That requires a lot of coordination.
It's highly calculated, and that's exactly what the DOJ is seizing on. So it wasn't a clerical error. It was a deliberate strategy to secure an authority to operate an ATO under completely false pretenses.
They got the Army sponsorship based on a total fiction.
Yes. They induced the government to pay them millions based on a lie.
It really changes the calculation for the whole industry. Because I think for a long time there was this sort of, I'll call it a sales engineering culture.
Oh yeah, the vaporware culture.
Right? Where a government buyer asks, hey, does it do X? And the sales guy says, oh yeah, that feature's right on the roadmap. Or, it's practically done in beta just to get the ink dry on the contract.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. This case seems to be drawing a very, very sharp red line that says, in federal government contracting, fake it till you make it is literally a felony.
Precisely. You cannot iterate your way to compliance after you've already signed the legal contract stating you are currently compliant.
You cannot beta test your security posture on the U.S. Army.
You really can't.
So here's my question. How did they get caught?
The mechanics of the capture.
Because if everyone in the company is in on the scheme, the engineers, the product managers, the sales team, who actually talks? This seems like a conspiracy of silence, and corporate cultures are generally pretty good at enforcing silence.
Well, silence gets really expensive when the government is offering a massive bounty.
Wow.
This brings us to the False Claims Act, and specifically the qui tam provisions.
Quit tam, it sounds ancient.
It is ancient, actually. It dates all the way back to the Civil War. It was originally designed to stop war profiteers from selling sick horses and faulty rifles to the Union Army.
Wow, sick horses to cloud computing.
Exactly. The core mechanism is the same. It allows a private individual, a whistleblower, to file a lawsuit on behalf of the United States government.
So a regular citizen can sue for the government?
Yes. And if the government recovers money from that lawsuit, the whistleblower gets a percentage cut of the recovery.
How much of a cut?
Usually somewhere between 15 and 30%.
Okay, let's do the math on that. If the DOJ recovered $6.8 billion in 2025,
Yeah, 15% of a multi-million-dollar settlement is huge. You are talking about life-changing wealth.
that is retirement money, that is buy an island money.
It's incredible financial incentive. The carrot is huge. But our sources point out something totally fascinating about the current psychological environment in 2026.
What's that?
It's not just about the carrot anymore. It's not just the money-driving whistleblowers. It's the stick.
The fear.
The absolute fear of personal criminal liability. Think about the classic prisoner's dilemma.
Okay,
Put yourself in the shoes of a mid-level security engineer at this company. You know your boss, Danielle Hillmer, is allegedly lying to the Army auditors.
right, I'm in the room when she tells us to hide the screen.
Exactly. In the old days, you probably stayed quiet. You wanted to keep your job, you wanted your bonus, and you figured, well, if we eventually get caught, the company just pays a fine. It's not my problem.
I don't go down for it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But now, you watch the news, you see the DOJ indicting individual managers, you see people getting perp walked.
So the math changes.
The math completely flips. You have to ask yourself, if this blows up and the FBI raids this office, am I going to be seen as a co-conspirator?
Did I aid and abet the fraud by hiding that specific tab? Did I commit a federal crime just by following my boss's order?
Exactly. So your motivation shifts entirely from, I want to get rich, to, I really don't want to go to federal prison.
Self-recognition.
The safest move for a mid-level employee today is to report the fraud to the DOJ before the DOJ finds it themselves.
It weaponizes the internal team against the executive.
It creates a massive pressure cooker. It's not just greed, it's survival.
That is a brutal psychological environment to work in. It destroys any kind of circle of trust within a non-compliant organization. You look to your left, you look to your right, and you are constantly wondering who is quietly filing a quit tam suit.
Which is exactly what the DOJ wants.
Oh, absolutely.
They know they can't audit every single line of code in the defense industrial base. They don't have the manpower or the technical resources to check every single server.
They need inside help.
So they are purposefully creating an environment where the risk of lying is so catastrophic and the probability of being outed by your own
Staff is so extremely high that companies are basically forced, to be honest. They are crowdsourcing the enforcement down to the very engineers building the systems.
It's brilliant, but terrifying. So let's pivot to survival.
Good idea.
Because honestly, this sounds terrifying for anyone in leadership. If the environment is this hostile with the DOJ hunting you and your own team, financially incentivized to turn you in, how does a legitimate, honest CISO survive? Because let's be real, no system is perfect. Every single network has gaps. I don't care who you are or how much budget you have, there's always a patch you missed or a configuration that drifted.
Oh, 100%.
Are we saying that if you have a single vulnerability, you are going to jail?
No, and this is probably the most important takeaway from all the sources we reviewed today. We have to be crystal clear about this distinction.
Okay, let's hear it.
It comes down to what the sources call the doctrine of transparent documentation.
The doctrine of transparent documentation. This sounds like the shield.
It is the shield. It's the only defense. The sources break it down into 4 distinct rules for leaders.
Let's go through them. Rule number 1?
Rule number 1 is honest assessments. It sounds incredibly simple, but it's profound in practice. It is infinitely better to thoroughly document a failure than to hide it.
Explain that. Why is documenting a failure legally safer?
Okay, so if you have a gap, let's say MFA is not deployed on these 3 legacy database servers because they're too old to support it.
A very common scenario.
Very common. If you write that down in your official POM, your plan of action and milestones.
The poem.
The POM is the formal government document where you list all your known vulnerabilities and your exact timeline and budget to fix them. If you put the MFA gap in the POM, the government auditor might be annoyed.
They might yell at you.
They might yell, they might withhold a milestone payment, they might even decide the risk is too high and cancel the contract entirely. But, and this is the key, it is a contract dispute. It is a civil administrative issue.
It's a business disagreement. It's a breach of contract, not a crime.
Precisely. But if you take that exact same gap, those 3 vulnerable servers, and you consciously hide it,
You leave it off the palm.
you intentionally omit it, that is fraud, that is criminal. The gap itself isn't the weapon, the secrecy is the weapon.
Wow.
A documented vulnerability is a compliance problem. A hidden vulnerability is a felony.
I want every listener to visualize that right now. Put it on a bumper sticker. A documented vulnerability is a problem. A hidden vulnerability is a crime.
It really should be on every CISO's wall. You have to learn to embrace the red ink on your compliance dashboards. If your dashboard is 100% green and, deep down it shouldn't be, you are in the danger zone.
You're painting a target on your back. Okay, so that's rule 1. What's rule number 2?
Rule 2 is the power to refuse. And frankly, this is the hardest one for the actual humans involved. CISOs and senior managers have to be perfectly willing to explicitly refuse to certify compliance.
Man, that is so much easier said than done.
Oh, it's agonizing.
You have the VP of sales screaming that they need the ATO to make the Q4 revenue numbers.
Yeah.
You have the CEO asking you in front of the board why you are the roadblock. You have investors breathing down your neck.
It is an incredible amount of pressure. It's the exact moment where the rubber meets the road. But the Hillmer indictment is your ultimate counter-argument now.
Right.
You have to be able to look at the CEO and say, I will not sign a false document, because that exact moment when your pen hits the paper or you click submit on that PDF, that is the moment the legal liability transfers from the amorphous corporation directly to you personally.
We own it.
You are the one attesting to the United States government that this is true. If you sign it knowing it's false, you are the one on the hook.
So how do you actually protect yourself from that internal corporate pressure? Because standing alone in front of a screaming executive team takes a massive amount of courage.
And that leads directly to Rule 3, cross-functional oversight. You never go it alone.
Bring in backup.
Bring in legal immediately. Bring in the compliance teams early in the process.
So strengthen numbers.
Yes, strengthen numbers. But more importantly, it establishes legal privilege and it frames the issue correctly for the business.
How so?
When you involve the general counsel, you are forcing alignment between the technical reality on the ground and the legal disclosure obligations of the company. If the lawyer looks at the fact that you lack MFA and says legally we must disclose this to the government, it takes the target off the CISO's back.
Ah, I see. It becomes a legal mandate, not just a nerdy technical opinion that sales can argue with.
Exactly. It makes the decision to disclose legally defensible. It shows any future DOJ investigator that the organization was being deliberative and careful, not deceptive.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. And Rule 4?
Rule 4 is audit integrity. This goes right back to the allegations of hiding screens during the demo. You must ensure and you must train your staff that they never, ever mislead a third-party assessor or a government auditor.
Complete honesty?
Radical honesty. If the system is broken, you show them the broken parts.
So if the auditor sits down and asks to see the continuous monitoring logs, and you know the logs are completely empty,
You show them the empty logs.
you just show them?
Yes, you pull it up and you say, as you can see, we have a total logging failure here. Here is the internal JIRA ticket where we are actively tracking the remediation.
Don't fake it.
Do not pull up a spreadsheet from last month and pretend it's live data.
Huh.
Do not redirect their browser to a different server. Do not blame a graphical glitch.
It really sounds like we are moving to a world where radical transparency is the only survival tactic.
We absolutely have to. The sources specifically mention systems like SPRS.
The Supplier Performance Risk System.
Right. The DOJ is actively and aggressively looking at the self-attestation scores that defense contractors enter into SPRS.
Because companies used to just go in and give themselves a perfect 110 score, right?
Exactly. They would just auto-fill a perfect 110 out of a 110 to win the bid. You can't do that anymore. If you claim a score of 110 today, you better have the forensic evidence and documentation to back up every single one of those 110 points.
Because they are checking.
Because the DOJ is using advanced data analytics to find the anomalies.
Oh, wow. They're automating the hunt.
Yeah. If you post a perfect SPRS score but you are constantly getting breached, or a whistleblower files a complaint saying your score is actually a 40, that delta between what you claimed and reality is exactly where the federal investigation starts.
You know, as we map all of this out,
Mm-hmm.
I am really struck by the potential unintended consequences of this whole shift.
It's a big concern.
Because the DOJ's logic is perfectly clear, right? Scare people into honesty.
Make the stick so big they have no choice.
Exactly. That's a very blunt instrument, but I wonder if the personal risk is actually this high now. If missing a critical configuration or having a rogue employee lie on a form could literally send a CISO to federal prison, who is going to want to take these jobs?
That is the exact provocative question that the sources leave us with. The industry is deeply worried we might see a massive brain drain.
A mass exodus.
Yeah. Top-tier cybersecurity talent might look at the defense sector and say, you know what, this is way too risky.
I'll go work in fintech.
I'll go work in retail. I'll go secure a gaming company.
Right. I can make the exact same salary securing a shoe store's e-commerce site without the lingering risk of a federal grand jury indictment.
Exactly. If the stick is too big, you might actually drive away the very practitioners you desperately need to secure the nation's most sensitive secrets.
Which is ironic.
Highly ironic, you might end up with a talent pool of people who are either way too naive to understand the legal risk they are taking on, or people who are simply too desperate for a job to care.
So we might end up with a government contracting sector that is technically very, very honest, but technically mediocre.
And in a world of advanced persistent threats, AI-driven cyber attacks, and highly funded nation-state adversaries, mediocrity is a massive security risk in itself.
Oh, definitely. An honest but incompetent CISO might lose the mission data just as fast as a dishonest one.
It's a terrifying thought, but for now, the rules of the game are set. The DOJ has made its move.
The board is set.
The Hillmer indictment is the ultimate warning shot heard round the world. The era of just paying cost of doing business fines is completely over. The era of personal executive accountability has officially begun.
So the final message for our listeners in February 2026 is crystal clear. If you're sitting in the chair right now, transparency is your only armor.
Document everything.
Document the gaps. Put them in the poem. Involve your legal team early and often. And for the love of everything holy, please turn on multi-factor authentication.
Please, it is really not that hard. Just turn it on.
That's it for this deep dive. We will definitely be watching the Hillmer trial closely as it unfolds. Stay safe out there and stay honest.
See you next time.
If you found this video helpful, please consider donating to helpallvets.org. Thank you.